Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. It's my pleasure to announce the next panel, as I think it's perhaps the most important panel of the whole conference. Of course, I'm biased because I'm introducing it, but this would have been a very interesting panel, I believe, even 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago. But now with what's happening in Ukraine, the war, I think it's an even more important and very topical panel where I think we will have a very interesting discussion. Because we're kind of short in time, I didn't really prepare a long speech. I just want to say a couple of words about the situation which is going on now in Europe with Russian gas and oil. So despite the EU was trying to reduce independence from Russian energy sources in basically more than the past 10 years, this wasn't a huge success. So if you look at the statistics, of course, we managed to reduce some forms of independence from Russian, especially oil, not necessarily gas, but still, if you look at the statistics, about 30% of the EU's oil imports and almost 40% of the gas imports come from Russia still. And of course, you have huge divergences between countries because you have countries like the UK, which it's only a couple of percent. But you have countries, especially on gas, like, for example, Hungary, but most of the countries in this region, especially Estonia, Slovakia, and Finland, who have a huge dependency, over 80% of the gas, and in some countries even 70% of the oil is coming from Russia still. And of course, we can say that Europe is, because of this, in a weak situation, which is to some extent true. But if you look at Russia, Russia is in a weak position because Russia is exporting most of its gas and oil towards the European Union and European countries. So again, if you look at the statistics, nearly 75% of Russia's total natural gas export still goes to Europe. Of course, in the recent years, they built capacities to try to send gas to China, for example, and there's huge plans on bringing gas and oil to India as well. But of course, this takes time. So in this sense, Russia is perhaps even in a more weaker position for the past couple of years. This is not saying that Europe is in a good position, especially in gas, because sadly, we have the LNG terminals in plans. America has agreed that it will send an additional 15 billion cubic meters of liquefied natural gas by the end of this year. But if you look at what Europe needs, this is basically peanuts, sadly. And even if they will deliver the aim, which is about 15 billion cubic meters by 2030, that's still almost a bit less than what Europe would need for a day, basically, in gas. So I think this is going to be a very interesting discussion because I don't really see, for the time being, the alternatives for neither Europe, neither Russia, basically, to manage to find new sources for Europe, new sources to get energy, and for Russia, new destinations for their energy. So it's my great pleasure to introduce the panel members. First, I would start out with Alexandr Vondra, who is a distinguished Czech politician, member of the Civic Democratic Party, and of course, a very important player in the dissident movement in the 80s, and one of the signers of the Charter 77. He has a very distinguished career in government. You had several very important roles. You've been Minister of Foreign Affairs, you've been Deputy Prime Minister for European Affairs, and also served as a Ministry of Defense as well. He is now currently a member of the European Parliament, where he sits in the Environment, Public Health and Food Safety Committee. The second person I would like to introduce is His Excellency János Csák, whose CV is so impressive that it would take away half of the panel to go through all the accomplishments. So I will just only say that he has been a chairman of course, of the MOL Group and Hungary's former ambassador to the UK. But he has also had very distinguished executive and board positions in several companies in Europe and Hungary. Just to name a few: Motav, of course, MOL Group, T-Mobile Hungary, Credit Anstalt Investment Bank, the Budapest Bank, Gedeon Richter, to name only a few of them. He has also been involved with the design terminal here in Hungary. He was one of the founders of the Kálmán Szél Foundation, and currently he is non-executive director of the Bank of China and also a co-chairman of the Hungarian-Slovakian Chamber of Commerce. We will have a Zoom participant as well, Alex Cranberg, who also has a very distinguished career in the energy sector. He is currently the chairman of Aspects Holdings, a leading oil, gas and geothermal explorer company in Central Europe. Before joining and basically being a founder of Aspect Holdings, he was a leading general. He was leading General Atlantic Partners oil and gas investment activity between 1981 and 1992. After which he founded Aspect Energy, which is a very big company, has more than 7 exploration wells all across the world, basically, from Texas to Belize to Hungary and Kurdistan. And of course, our fourth member is Werner J. Patzelt, leading authority on German politics and an MCC visiting fellow. He was a professor at the Department of Political Systems and Comparative Analysis at the Technical University of Dresden for almost 20 years. And he taught at several other universities, especially in Passau and Paris, for example, even in Moscow. And currently he's staying at MCC. And of course, last but not least, I would like to introduce the moderator of the panel, my dear colleague and, dare I say, mentor, John O'Sullivan, who is the president of the Danube Institute. I would like to ask the members of the panel and John to take their places, and I wish you a very interesting discussion. Thank you.
Good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this debate. I'm delighted. Thank you, István, for that kind introduction. We have basically an hour and 20 minutes before we have lunch, so it can be a very lively debate. Now, on the screen behind me, I think, yes, there is the title of the session, which is Europe's Energy Crisis. The crisis was here before the sanctions. And of course, because we're men of honor, we will debate these questions, and they're a very rich long list of questions too. But of course, there is little doubt that the intersection between Europe's energy crisis and the Ukraine crisis is going to be, at least we're going to start with that, and will probably dominate the entire session, because it fundamentally reveals so many things about the way we have been governing and so many problems that we have to solve one way or another. So I'm going to begin by simply asking our 4 contenders to give us make some opening remarks, which I hope will include some earlier reflections on the way these two crises intersect and what we should do about them. Perhaps I should begin with the home team, János Csák, and invite him to open the discussion.
Thank you, John. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the invitation and the excellent organization. I guess we are in a crisis already because the air conditioning doesn't seem to work. It's pretty hot here. I think over the last 2 weeks, a new world order was born. Russia just demonstrated that there is only one single sole world power, and that's the United States of America. Economically, the US has been the leading force in the world. Militarily, until Russia inflicted this war, everybody believed that Russia is strong. No one believes it any longer. And thirdly, culturally, Russia kind of destroying itself. Now, according to the International Energy Agency, by 2042, some 50% of the global energy use will be still oil and gas. So even with the green strategies and everything, the current rate actually fossils is 87%. So we will decrease the oil and gas consumption, but still it will be a significant part even 20 years down the road. Now let's see where the key players in this game will be in 20 years' time. I don't think that there will be a new power which will challenge the US supremacy. China is good in defending its territory, but neither economically nor militarily is able to assert herself far beyond its borders. Russia, I don't think that Russia will come back, and what we see today is such an isolation and segregation of Russia that for me resembles the segregation and isolation of Germany in 1922. And we remember what happened after that. If you squeeze a nuclear or major power into the corner, that will hit back in one way or another. And that doesn't mean that that power will come back in full force. That will mean that it will still have the power to come back and hurt. Germany. Germany seems to be in the grips of the vice. First, it's squeezed on the supply side, that is raw materials and energy. And my expectation is that it will be squeezed on the demand side as well, China in particular. So that means that, yet again, there will be only one big boy in the ground, and that will be the United States. And we will have to wait and see how the United States will use its supreme position. Right now, the intelligence community and the policymakers in the US recognize that all the expectations of what is Russia capable of were overinflated. Russia has never been as strong as the analysts or the decision makers supposed. So John, answering your question, the US will be the only force that can orchestrate the global migration of either goods or services or people. In the former panel, our colleagues mentioned the inflation in food prices. Now, if food is not flow from Ukraine, Russia, and other places to Africa and other places, then those people will flow in the other direction. And imagine a white table, either in Brussels or Washington, D.C. I can't say any other capital where that white table could be set. What they will talk about, how to deal and how to construct an international structure that enables us to restructure and re-engineer the world trade, that people can live peacefully in where they live and mitigate the risks of another war of a bigger scale than what we have been involved in now. Thank you.
János, thank you very much indeed. I'm now going to ask Alex Cranberg if he would like to open his remarks with some general observations on the theme. Thank you. Alex. By the way, I should welcome you again because you are the man who is known to be able to find oil where nobody else seems to have been able to find it before. So you're in position to give extremely useful advice while you're here. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me well? I'm sorry to be appearing to hover over everybody.
We can hear you fine.
Great. Well, I come to this energy conversation with a certain degree of optimism about what's potential, but a certain degree of concern about how the world is placing all of its bets on renewables and exposing itself to great vulnerabilities by doing so. One of the big drivers for that is, of course, ESG, which the way that it actually operates could stand these days for export Soviet gas. The S should be changed to mean security and not social. And then we perhaps have more sensible policy. The concern over the environment is pushing a lot of people to say we shouldn't invest anymore in oil and gas without a really clear vision as to how renewables are in a position to be able to replace the massive amount of energy that's provided by oil and gas today. A starting point might be the observation that Germany has the highest residential electricity prices in the world, and they still haven't, the second highest, only after Bermuda. And they still haven't achieved much of their transition toward net zero. But the impact on the oil industry, which I'm a representative, is that people are trying to prevent us from getting insurance, from finance, trying to enact policies which make it increasingly difficult to drill oil and gas wells. What does that mean? Well, if no more oil and gas wells get drilled in the world, the natural decline of oil and gas wells would between now and 2030 would mean that our 100 million barrels a day of production would decline to only 50 million barrels a day. Obviously, the world can't live with over 50 million barrels a day. And in a place like Texas, we produce 5 million barrels a day in the Permian Basin. That goes to 500,000 barrels a day by 2030 because the decline rates of the wells in West Texas is so much greater than the average in the world. So this idea that we should discourage oil and gas investment in the West in order to somehow force the conversion to net zero by 2050, it may as well have been a policy designed by the Russians to support increasing reliance on them. I go back to maybe 10, 15 years ago when Chevron was trying to drill in Bulgaria. They had shale gas ideas, and Bulgaria could very well be a substantial shale gas producer. But the Russians were very effective in stimulating an environmental movement against what were considered to be the dangers of oil and gas drilling and fracking, dangers which apparently don't exist in Pennsylvania and Texas and Oklahoma and Colorado and other places where this is very common. The result was ultimately Chevron never developed any gas in Bulgaria, which is kind of ironic considering that today Russia is cutting Bulgaria off from its gas exports. I think there's an important lesson to be learned here because whether or not the environmental movement is in fact stimulated or encouraged by Russia, the effects on policy are the same as if it were. I'm also a big believer in in the potential for increased oil and gas production around the world, but also in Europe. There is people used to write off West Texas and say, okay, West Texas is producing 2 million barrels a day at one point, and now it's down to 250, 300,000 barrels a day. We don't know where we can find any more of this. Well, today, West Texas is producing, the Permian Basin of West Texas is producing 5 million barrels a day, more than 10 times what it produced just 10 years ago. So as we look at trying to address this energy crisis, I think it's very important to not to neglect the resources which are available in Central Europe and the petroleum resources which can be developed and exported from around the world, so that we're no longer in a position where ESG stands for export Soviet gas.
Thank you very much indeed. Now let me turn to Professor Patzelt and again ask him to reflect on the situation from Germany.
Well, first of all, I would like to underline the title of this panel, which is absolutely correct. The crisis was there in a latent form before the sanctions came as a reaction to the Russian aggression. This Russian aggression and the aftermath of it, the consequences we have to face, simply bring to open light what has been wrong for long. So we need to look at these things in longer perspectives. The second remark refers to the role of ideology. So many policy decisions were either made into the wrong direction, or were not made at all, or were made bona fide, hoping that the world might be different from how it is. And now it turns out that so much of our policy was based on misperceptions of reality. Our German foreign policy minister put it this way: we were sleeping, we woke up, and we found the world changed. I always insisted that this is absolutely wrong. The world has not changed, not a bit. The world and the patterns along which big power policy is made, the lines along which international economy is developing, are exactly the same. But there were illusions about the stability of framework conditions. Like my old friend, dead for 500 years, Niccolo Machiavelli, put it, it is so typical of humans not to think about bad weather as long as the sun is shining. And this sunshine policy era seems to be over. For instance, we, in particular Germans, forgot, and I'm stressing that because Germany has some importance in Europe, and among all European countries, Germany is unique in its, inclination towards ideology. There is a famous saying from the 19th century by the German poet Heinrich Heine, saying, Britain is ruling the seas, Russia the land, but the Germans are the uncontested champions when it comes to the sky or even heaven of illusions and ideas. And this is why we are in a particularly awkward position, we as Germans right now. First of all, in terms of geopolitics. Thinking in terms of geopolitics has been not quite fashionable in Germany and in some other Western countries as well. Thinking about buffering states between power blocks was not quite fashionable. Instead, the general feeling was, ever more countries can join the NATO without any significant reactions by Russia, which was, in a certain way, naive. Or, in the German case, the neglect for the role of military power. The general German feeling after the Second World War was, we need pacifism, and this will be sufficient. Let's maintain stability, or let other big powers maintain stability, and we want to be pacifist, not spending too much on military power. And so we neglected our army, and even our highest general had to admit that the German army is not able to go to war, which is the purpose of our army, not in an aggressive way, but to oppose aggression. So we really are helpless, which is not very advantageous for our neighbors in Europe. Then there was the illusion that we might be able to initiate change, regime change, change of political culture, in this case of Russia, by doing commerce. This was the big hope. If we strengthen our economic ties with Russia, well, one day Russia will be as easygoing a player like France or Spain. And then comes the big problem, which turns out now to be of particular importance for Germany. For ideological reasons, back in the 70s, a new generation of people entering politics come together, lined up under the flag of fighting nuclear power plants. The reasoning, the argument has been, if we have this kind of technology, you need, well, strong political institutions to prevent any damages done or any problems with nuclear energy. You need to build what was called a nuclear state, depriving citizens of freedom. Therefore, for the sake of living in liberty, we need to get rid of nuclear plants. Well, this was the idea of a tiny group of people at the beginning. It spread over, was the most important mobilizing factor of the Green Party, and became German governmental policy under Chancellor Angela Merkel. So we tried to get rid of nuclear energy, and then we detected that world climate is changing, and CO2 emissions might contribute something to that. Therefore, we need to get our economy emission-free in a very short period of time, because the world climate is not waiting for our slow pace of policy making. Okay, and so we faced what we called an energy gap. Without nuclear energy, without fossil energy, how do we keep German economy going? And here the idea came up, well, we can beat two birds with the same stone, to put it this way. We deepen our relations with Russia, make sure the transformation of the Russian society by having close economic and gas ties, so to speak. And we have a bridge in our energy until the time when a big part of Germany is full of windmills and solar panels, and therefore we have renewable energies. And this ideological approach now came to an end. We see this does not work. And therefore, one of the challenges in Germany, and presumably in other parts of Europe as well, is getting rid of old-fashioned ideological assumptions. Last remark. Even after this war, nobody knows when this war is going to end. Russia will not disappear from the European map. And it will remain a big power, fighting back like Germany did after 1920, which are no good perspectives if history would repeat herself. But even in the future, the most important things to export by Russia is energy, is raw materials. Therefore, it is of utmost importance now to maintain as many bridges towards Russia as can be maintained, and to come back to a useful and constructive relationship, even in terms of energy supply after this war, of which nobody, I repeat myself, knows when it's going to end. And since Germany, I repeat myself again, is of some importance in Europe, you should, depending on your degree of religiousness, send your prayers towards heaven that Germany gets out of this impasse of ideological policy making and gets a clearer look at how reality really is. Now we need to be woke in a very particular sense. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed. Sasha Vondra, you've been a defense minister. You were a dissident in the communist years. You were recently elected to the European Parliament. I believe you were placed number 15 on the party list, but the voters voted you number 2. So you were in a strong position, it seems to me, to deliver an analysis on all of these questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Jonas. Thank you for inviting me. And finally, I could have a time to accept and see the beauty of this institute, because before that it was always in some other facilities, but here it's a special one. Yes, I was elected from the bottom of our list because, you know, I'm an old man, and, you know, if you are older and if you have most of your career behind, it has one advantage: you can speak freely without any nervosity, without any pardons. And that's something what the people appreciated, of course. You know, if it's confronted with the classic, boring, bureaucratic language of which is a typical disease of the current European politics, inter alia. Look, to the subject. I think, on one hand, this current crisis is really deep, and I don't see any easy way out of there. Just the magnitude is suddenly undersigned by the act of aggression of Russia, and it's purely the act of the aggression. I listened to my friend János, and I fully understand that one time later we will have a debate of the historians, you know, who everybody contributed to what's happened today. And it's pretty legitimate, as well as we see as a pretty legitimate never-ending debate about the impact of the Versailles system of 1918. You know, there are those who still appreciate it, like, you know, myself, because Czechoslovakia has been established as on the debt. But I do understand a bit different attitude in Hungary. It's history, simply. But the fact, I would warn just, you know, to make an easy parallels between Germany on 1920s and Russia of the last 20 years. You know, we did not isolate Russia at all. We did not force to pay them any reparation, and they made huge damages in my country. You know, occupation of 68, devastation with their military presence. You know, we just wanted to get out and not ask. You know, we did not get any money or whatever. So there is a difference we should not forget. And I think because it's really an act of unprovoked aggression, in fact, of the magnitude which I do not remember in time of my adulthood, so kind of a black and white situation. So I think that our duty is to stay with Ukraine in this difficult time. So I wanted to say this clearly. At the same time, the reality is that, you know, we are encountering this with a position of certain weakness. I'm in the West. We are encountering this mentally unprepared on this current situation. Typically, you know, you can prove this the last months, you know, almost every morning when we were getting up and watching, you know, which hospital, theater, railway station, apartment flats of the ordinary people were destroyed, bombs, you know, Bucha and all that. The politicians, you know, and with Joe Biden, starting with Joe Biden, ending with Chancellor Scholz, this is the crime against humanity. But in the evening, we are concluding that we are not going to arrest him because we are not strong enough, not willing to do that. So what does it mean? On one hand, you know, if he is a war criminal, you cannot make a business as usual with him. But on the other hand, he will stay with us for some time. And in the future world, you know, you can see already, you know, these votes in the UN. Those who are abstaining, that's the most interesting. China, you know, India, South Africa. Brazil was interesting, you know, this, the President Bolsonaro, you know, this man, you know, the target of the European humanist, he was voting with us for the first time because as a cowboy, you know, he instinctively sided with the West. But then, of course, on the other vote, he was already with the other future pillars of of the multipolar world. So we are heading into a more realpolitik world, and this is something what Europe is totally mentally unprepared. So that's the first thesis, which complicates the situation. Second is that this crisis did not fall suddenly out of the skies. There were the warning signal well in advance, and we were not able to read that, thanks for the German admission here, because look, we are now preparing ourselves, I mean, my country, my government, for the EU presidency in the second part of this year. And just yesterday, I had in Olomouc a joint debate with Mirek Topolánek, who was the Prime Minister of Czech Republic during the first presidency in 2009. And, we just mentioned how much these core issues are similar or almost the same like were in 2009. 2009 we had, Russia and the area in between, which it was a reaction to Georgia war and to our unwillingness, to anchor Ukraine and Georgia strategically, but, at least trying, to offer something softer. So that was the Eastern Partnership. Secondly, it was the energy security, because you maybe remember the end of 2008 and early 2009 was the largest gas crisis when Putin shut down the gas to the Ukraine, but with huge effect on, for example, Slovakia and Bulgaria, because the people were freezing. It was in January. So we had to try to fix this issue, and had many proposals. For example, we have already that time built. Everything was ready to build a consortium to construct Nabucco. With MOL, with RWE, with EMV, supported, by the governments of Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Austria. 35 billion, I think, cubic meters was supposed to be transported from Caspic region, from Azerbaijan, from Turkmenistan. The project was killed. It was killed by the German government because they did not want a competition to Nord Stream. And without RWE, we were not able to make it because, thanks God, at least we want some north-south interconnections, the reverse flows in the current pipelines, thus, to protect us against some of the impact of these gas games. But, just imagine that we would have now Nabucco operational, Then, 2011, Fukushima, and the German hysterical decision. There was just one victim of Fukushima disaster in Japan. Only one man has died. One man has died, no more. Every weekend on our highways is killed more people. But hysterical decision which destroyed the energy market in Central Europe, which then led, Germany to rely just purely on the gas as a transitional instrument, how to reach the paradise of the new Green Deal in the future. And now, we are hanged over the Putin's policy. The third was economy, the priority, because we were heading into the major crisis, the debt, which were deepened by Euro crisis. And, I think that we are expecting exactly the same. Italy is already in the troubles. It was somehow covered with the policy of the cheap money by ECB, but, the inflation is growing groggy. The Czechs, the Germans don't like the big inflation because, we are saving nations. And definitely we need to fight the inflation. Thus, it will have, of course, the impact in the southern wing of the EU. So, We believe that future of the energy should be built on nuclear, and we are really fighting for the nuclear renaissance together with France. In the UN, thanks God, had at least some achievements already, because that will provide our baseline. And then, yes, of course, you can have a renewable, but you need to balance this when there is not any wind or sun. That's pretty useful often in Europe. Thus, you need to have a system of the batteries, but it will not easy, you know, because the raw materials are in Africa, in Siberia, so it's either controlled by Russia or China. And the Chinese will have the business with Russia. India will have the business with Russia. So, you know, I think we need to be more realistic. We need to forget about, you know, the belief that, yeah, we are now in the era of some global paradise when our values are shared by everybody and everybody is going to tie the belt to save the planet in 2050. You know, I think that our goal is to survive next 3 winters without having a Weimar Republic at home, and forget about, you know, if the sea level rise by 1-2 centimeters in 50 years, fine, you know, we can adapt that. So to build our house a bit higher, that's the humankind knows how to adapt to those situations. But really to survive next 3 winters is our goal.
Thank you very much indeed. We've had 4 very strong statements here, and I'm now in a moment going to ask specific questions to each of the speakers, and then explore any differences there are on the panel, and then we'll throw it open to the questions from the floor. I should just say before I turn to János Csák with the first question that behind me in the screen there are a series of infographics which are appearing one after the other, which I'm grateful to John Prout, who will be the moderator of the next panel, for providing. And of course, they are on the topics that we're discussing and the helpful background to them. So unless John wants to add anything to what I've said, no, thank you. Now, let me turn, János, to you. And I'd like you, because you are, after all, someone who's involved in both Hungarian politics and the Hungarian energy industry, to answer the question of the evolution of Hungarian energy policy. How did we get to this stage? Are there specific reasons in addition to the ones which Hungary shares with Germany, namely the ones that were outlined a moment ago? And I ask this question because obviously it is the Hungarian economic policy that has led arguments to be made that the government is too close to Russia, and consequently it would be interesting to see what you think of it from your particular useful vantage point.
Well, thank you. Just to tell you how close we are, out of the Hungarian foreign direct investment, Russia's proportion is 2% of the GDP. US, Netherlands, Germany, Italy, Korea leads the pack. So the Russian exposure is overstated. It's true that the Hungarian economy resembles the German economy in energy mix as well. The only difference is that we insist, like our Czech friends, on the nuclear, the clean nuclear, despite of the moods and the illusions-driven policies. And isn't it ironic that we need such a big crisis for Brussels to accept that the nuclear is still valid and legitimate? Let me tell you a story about the history of the Hungarian economic policy, and because we are a middle-sized country, our economic policy is our geopolitical policy as well. Hungary is the only country who continuously champion championed Ukraine's and the West Balkans' accession to the EU. Hungary is the only country which championed and continued to champion the alternative pipelines. And Sasha mentioned Nabucco. I was involved in the Nabucco negotiations, partly as chairman of MOL, partly as a kind of good faith ambassador, and then as a real ambassador. This is what happened. I had a negotiation in Washington, D.C. in 2008 at the Overseas Private Investment Corporation that the U.S. should be involved both in the build-out of the Nabucco and also the LNG terminal in Croatia. Unfortunately, OPIC's mandate is only to provide funds for projects where the U.S. can sell U.S. products. And the only product they could sell, not the pipes, but legal services. And that was not needed. Then, when I was an ambassador, I negotiated with the British government. At that time, Statoil, the Norwegian company, and BP had the joint venture with the Azeris, SOCAR, and we tried to persuade the Norwegian and the British government to help us to build the Nabucco. The answer was that it's a company issue, and all of a sudden, the Norwegian government signed a contract with the Russians for the North Sea shelf, which was up and pending for 30 years, and all of a sudden, the successor of Nabucco went to Greece and Italy. Those markets, which are clearly supplied by North African gas. So it was really hard to use any political, geopolitical, and pure energy policy arguments that will prevail over the bilateral relations of such countries with Russia. And the same is happening in geopolitics. Look at the West Balkans. How come, Sasha, how come that we cannot act together? You said in Brussels we have uncertainty, we have undecidedness. What else do we need than a war in our doorstep to bring in Belgrade, to bring in Montenegro? If we want to miss the next train, this is the time to miss.
Thank you very much. Alex Cranberg, perhaps I can turn to you and ask a question about the energy politics in the United States. In the last 2 years, America has gone from being an energy exporter to being an energy importer again. And that is the result of, I suggest, of two developments. One is, of course, the election of a different president. The Democratic Party is in power, and it has a different set of energy policies to the Republicans. But the second is that it's also the product, this policy change is also the product of fairly strong and deep cultural changes in the United States, very similar to the ones that Professor spoke about in relation to Germany. Do you see, what do you see the prospect of changing this policy in 2024 and perhaps even later this year as a result of elections? Or are we likely to see it, the present energy policy in which you're buying energy from Venezuela after refusing a pipeline that would get it from Canada?
It's a great question. Certainly, the expectation is in 2022 that Congress will change hands to the Republicans who are much more energy friendly. And in 2024, it's awfully hard to say what'll happen 2 years from now. But the U.S. is still is a net oil importer slightly. It's certainly a net gas exporter. But on total energy mix, I suspect we may still be a net exporter. But you're right, culturally, this same kind of wishful thinking ideology that pervaded people's attitudes toward Russia, for example, is creating a climate where people think that we can just magically wish ourselves into some other kind of energy source. And I think that this wake-up call that we've been discussing that occurred in Germany and the rest of Europe about our expectations for peaceful evolution of Russia also will have its impact on U.S. Political and cultural attitudes toward oil and gas and energy. It's I did want to thinking about Nabucco, because I was involved a little very, very tangentially in that, urging people to add oil and gas infrastructure that would reduce reliance on Russia. To put just something in perspective, the cost of Nabucco was about the cost of an aircraft carrier, $5-6 billion. I thought at the time, I wrote at the time, that Nabucco should be considered perhaps Central Europe's aircraft carrier. Poland's aircraft carrier was Nabucco, and obviously would have had much greater positive impact on security if Nabucco had been built than if an aircraft carrier had been built. But it's that kind of putting things into perspective about what's important. Eventually, it does come home to people, and I love that expression that the Americans try everything else that doesn't work but they finally come around to the right solution eventually. We'll learn the importance of oil and gas, and we'll return to some investment in it, as well as pursuing all the various technologies and renewables that are so popular. But ultimately, when people pay more at the pump, when air conditioning doesn't work anymore, realism sets in. And I'm an optimist about the U.S. political environment improving for more sensible energy policy.
Thank you very much. Werner, Patzelt, let me ask you two questions in one. And it's about the political response to the cultural atmosphere you were describing in Germany. Immediately after his election last weekend, Emmanuel Macron is said to have telephoned the German Chancellor first. The German coalition government is obviously a rather shaky one, full of conflict. What kind of policy do you think will emerge from that coalition, and in what direction will the French president push it? And secondly, the policies you described were, as you pointed out, established first by governments in which the Christian Democrats were the major party. There's been, I think, a sense that since in the last few weeks that Mrs. Merkel, in a sense, is being moved. I mean, the party is moving away from her. It has a new leader in Friedrich Merz. Is he, do you think, going to move the party on these issues, Ukraine and energy, in a significantly different direction?
Let me start with the remark that the German government and the German public as well is now having a rendezvous with reality. And reality turns out to be different from what many hoped, including our Chancellor Angela Merkel. It is true that the problems we're facing right now are, to a significant degree, a legacy of Angela Merkel's way of making policy and of her political decisions. So this rendezvous with reality will change, and has already changed, the way the Green Party thinks about significant parts of the world, has changed the positions of the Social Democratic Party, not the party as a whole, but at least of the Chancellor and some of his supporters. And it has changed the role or even the positions of the Christian Democratic Union. Because the Christian Democratic Union, along with a lot of internal resistance, was following Angela Merkel because she was supported so much by the media. So in the CDU, those who tried to oppose Angela Merkel's policies always were minoritarian, and they were labeled as being, well, hardcore, cold warriors, not open for modern approaches to this and that and that. And this changes right now because the present government tried to continue the lines of Angela Merkel's policies, and the CDU had to accept the role of opposition. So there is something changing. As to the future politics of the German government, one should at least spend a second on the thought that this government would not hold for long, because we have now really strong tensions between the Green and the Liberals on the one side, which is a funny combination, because in earlier times they used to behave like cats and dogs towards each other, and the Social Democrats at the other side. The Greens, which is an irony as well, turned from a pacifist party to a bellicist party right now. They're the most ardent supporters of delivering weapons to Ukraine and so on, whereas in the Social Democratic Party, in particular in the Bundestag party group of the Social Democrats, the resistance against this new course of Chancellor Scholz is growing and growing and growing. And we have discussions in Germany whether this traffic light coalition would be changed in a couple of months into a Jamaica-type coalition, that is with a chancellor from the CDU in the midst of this coalition. So this is an open question. This government is trying to cope with its steep learning curve, and maybe this learning curve is too steep. Last remark on that, there is a famous saying, only Nixon could go to Beijing. Only a well-known anti-communist could try to make a deal with Mao Zedong at that time. And here, to say something which gives at least some hope, here we see that fortunately enough the Germans elected for a social democratic-led government with a Green foreign minister. Because if we had now the CDU in power, we would have big demonstrations on the German streets organized by the Social Democrats and by the Greens against this, well, policy of the German government driving us close to a third world war and so on and so forth, only because the Greens and the Social Democrats are in power and are responsible and have to go through this rendezvous with reality and have to suffer from what they see or experience in this rendezvous. Only this creates some kind of internal stability. Last remark, nuclear energy. As I put it before, it was the matter of a whole generation, an act of belief, not an act of rational considerations. Now we have some voices in the Christian Democratic Union, in the electoral campaign, even in the ranks of the Green Party, that maybe nuclear energy might be, at least for some years or decades, a solution for the impasse into which we have brought ourselves because of our inconclusive energy politics. And here's the exit, the possible exit. The French, as they always have been, insist on the use of nuclear power. They try to invent and to manufacture new nuclear power plants. And since one of the most important parts of our German foreign policy thinking is that we need to be in close touch with France, in particular in this time of crisis, referring to the need for acting in close pace, shoulder on shoulder with France, might enable those who are in favor of nuclear energy in Germany, in the Christian Democratic Union, among the Social Democrats, even among the Greens, to say, for the sake of our good relationships with France, we simply have to accept this devilish endeavor of nuclear energy. And by the way, it would solve our problems, at least for a certain period of time, because we do not need to underestimate the resistance which will emerge in Germany as soon as the government really wants to increase the number of windmills and of solar panel camps around the country. So this might be an easy impasse, and through this impasse only a government can go, which is like Nixon in Beijing.
Thank you very much. Sasha Vondra, the last session before this was essentially on the V4 and Visegrad 4. And there's no doubt that Visegrad 4 is extremely important to the 4 countries of which it's a member as a way of influencing particularly Brussels, but more generally pooling their interests and power in European politics. At the same time, there are now serious differences between members of it in relation to the Ukraine and energy crises. I'm thinking, for example, with Poland in one axe and the Hungary at the other, with perhaps Slovakia and the Czech Republic in between. I wonder how you think this is going to play out and how it should play out. And broadening that question, it also looks as though Europe, as the initial urge of unity begins to fade, it also looks as though there are other patterns of difference in policy towards Russia, in particular over Ukraine, with the Anglo-Americans and plus the Poles and others, versus possibly a policy in which the French, the Germans, the Italians, and the Hungarians would be pushing instead for peace and prudence.
Well, John, I'm a great believer in the cooperation in Central Europe. I was among those who were standing here at the Visegrad Castle in 1991 and inaugurated the groupings. I was even among those who were planning this before, because with the inauguration we were waiting. Once we will have Lech Walesa as elected president in Poland, we did not want to do this with Jaruzelski still in Belvedere. And I think that Visegrad has proved its meaning many times. It did it during the NATO enlargement campaign. It did it during this energy security debate in 2008-9. It did it during the migration crisis in 2015. And will definitely should have the role in future too. And any kind of a formats, from Visegrad to this larger, 3C initiatives makes a sense even from the really strategic perspective. Number one, with the Brexit departure, with the British departure, we have lost the balance in Europe in triangle, between London, Berlin, and then Paris. Just the Franco-German relationship is not balanced by its nature because Germany is larger than France and richer. And then also this north-southern axis, because a lot has been done according to west-east axis. Raw materials from Russia, from east to the west, from the west to the east, the markets, and cheaper labor force opportunities. So now with this new situation in Europe, and simply I cannot imagine to do the business with Russia as usual, and with effectively ending with some kind of a buffer zone in between, because look, Belarus on one hand, it's already incorporated in Russia de facto. On the other hand, Finland and Sweden are now openly talking about joining NATO. So the Ukraine is in fact the last country in some kind of a limbo. It must be fixed, otherwise it's just the invitation for Russia to continue. Thus, we will have a sharp border between Europe and Russia. We are again frontline states by nature. And thus, this north-south axis is very important, with regards to the security cooperation, with regards to the military mobility, with regards to the transportation. And this is exactly what the logic of the Central European cooperation advises. So, yes, we do have some differences now with Hungary, because we were expecting a little bit more support for Ukraine. Yes, you are not providing them the guns like we, the Poles, Slovaks, are doing, but you can maybe help, you know. There would be, if the war is going to continue longer time, then there is a huge problem how to get the grain like wheat and other agrarian commodities outside on the outside market, because the sea road is blocked. You have this new terminal, you know. This is the only way, alternative way is to do this, for example, with railways. So just I'm advising, you know, what you can contribute to, not just to well-being of Ukraine, because they would be able to continue to sell their grain, but how to save Europe, you know, because there is a danger in Africa, you know, of the hunger and, you know, raising the another migration way, you know, from the south, which is a nightmare for us. You know, these Ukrainians, they are like us, so we are able to accommodate them, but, you know, we are not able to accommodate the people of Africa in Europe. So I think you had election. Congratulations to your spectacular result. I was always defending Orban among the European, in the European debates, that he's a conservative and he's a real conservative. This is something what is almost unknown in the Western Europe. But here I disagree with you. I was expecting more. So maybe, you know, you can do now more. It's after the elections. I give you one advice. And then certainly I think it's also, one thing is important, you know, because this mainstream West European press, mainstream, even now the Czech press, is so much influenced by this leftist liberal picture, not just of Hungary, of Poland too. And we need, you know, to counteract this somehow by common activities, just to explain the conservatism and the good sides to our European friends.
I take it, yes, would you like to come back, János?
Yes. You know, this is the V4 spirit, what we've been doing for 30 years or so, and even before, when we drank our wines and beers. You are right that we have to fight back, and I think Central Europe alone, V4 or even the 3 Cs initiative cannot do too much without an overall European solution. Just in case, to address your concerns about Ukraine, Hungary is the country which on a per capita basis received most of the refugees from Ukraine. Secondly, we are building huge railway hub on the border of Ukraine, which is obviously for trades, but also provides in the future, hopefully, a huge revenue for Ukraine and a way to deliver from Beijing through Rotterdam anything. And thirdly, it might escape your attention, but on December 21st last year, Hungary was the only country which signed a contract with Ukraine to supply gas, natural gas to Ukraine. The only country from Europe. So we are doing our best, and we cannot forget that we have a huge Hungarian minority there, and we don't want them to be exposed to what is happening in other places. But may I broaden the issue? I think Europe's future depends on whether we will have some kind of leadership as a peace broker or moderator. For that, if I have to give a job description, it should be a seasoned person who faced success and failures as well, who has relationship transatlantic and eastward. And right now there is one person in the European landscape like that. It's Emmanuel Macron. It's up to him whether he is able to talk to Putin, and Biden offered his hand already, first after the elections. If Europe don't take the opportunity to broker this peace deal on the land of Europe, if we need Turkey, Japan, the US, Argentina, or you name it, then it's a clear failure of Europe. And I really hope that Professor's opinion about the German-French improving relationship will materialize, because Central Europe alone, as Sasha alluded to, can defend in a way itself. But we need a European, and that was our dream in 1990, we need a European unity, a considerate unity, which takes into consideration the interest of the nation states, the Portugal nation state, the Spanish nation state, the Polish, the Czech, and so on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me ask if the young lady with the mobile microphone is around. Yes, thank you. We have 15, 16 minutes to go. Thank you. And I'm going to throw it open to the floor, because I think there will be a lot of questions in response to this discussion. Would anyone like to raise their hands to ask a question? The lady there.
Hello, this is addressed to Your Excellency Csák. I'm wondering whether Hungary has considered using some of the small nuclear reactors that Bill Gates has been working on for quite a while, and those might be covered by OPIC in terms of financing. Because certainly the large nuclear is much more complex and much more difficult to finance, but the smaller ones might be doable.
I think, János, that's for you.
Yeah. I am not involved with the government at all. So therefore, I don't know what is the thinking, but I will convey this. It depends on the size, and I used to work in the pharmaceutical industry, and the tests takes long. I don't know where this small nuclear plant testing stands at this stage, but good idea. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Another question? Yes, gentleman there, and then the gentleman here. But
my question is about nuclear energy as well, about the relation between Russia and Hungary, for example. I'm not so sure about the other four countries, but I know that the Paks atomic plant is planned together with Russia in cooperation, and also the nuclear fuel is provided by Russia. The first part of my question would be, in regard to the history, why is that cooperation with Russia so big, and why isn't there a European Union solution for this? And now, with the newest developments in regards to atomic energy as green energy in Europe, how can we expect to change this? Will there be a closer cooperation about nuclear energy in the European Union? Maybe also the Czech opinion would be interesting on this topic. Thank you very much.
First János, and then do you want to come in? Yeah.
Well, nuclear, with regards to Russia, we, by the decision of not just the government, but even the parliament, so there's a really wide consensus, we decided to exclude both Russia and China from the nuclear energy, because we take this as a strategic issue and don't want to be too exposed of the situation of blackmailing. You know, typical blackmailing is today when the Russians stop the gas deliveries to Poland and Bulgaria. So We want to avoid it. So the reality is that we are planning to build one big reactor in Dukovany, which is additional to what is there, and then to another big one in Temelín. We started a tender for Dukovany, invited French, Westinghouse, and the Koreans, and then there is also the option for Temelín. We'll see, you know, how it is gonna to develop. For future, I would not even exclude it an option government to government, because, you know, there is the nuclear research, which we have a very strong. So we are part, for example, in the Kadarash research, this Czech institute in Řeš. So the question why EU is not taking initiative, well, I was elected in the European Parliament in 2019. And when I started, you know, with the idea to establish the nuclear forum there, you know, even, you know, I was criticized that I used the word nuclear because it was forbidden because of the Germans and Austrians. I continued to fight, and the result after 2 years fight is that we have achieved that nuclear is now part of this taxonomy for the sustainable finance. That's important because otherwise, you know, it would be almost impossible to construct a nuclear power, because you would not find a credit for that, insurance and all that. But still, Germany was opposing that, and only because there were a final trade-off. You know, we with the French were fighting for nuclear. Germans were fighting for gas. It was still before the war. So there was some kind of a mutual agreement which allowed nuclear, but still it's difficult. For example, we have now opened the legislation to the Green Deal, and still there is an opposition to include nuclear as some kind of a strategic. You know, Europe is still unprepared, and in fact, there is only one producer in France, and it's a disaster. You know, we are heading towards the multipolar competition with China, Russia, and others. They are not giving up the nuclear. We need a nuclear, not only for civilian purposes. We also need this for the military one, because if, you know, one day US will say us goodbye. You know, UK is already out, so there is only France, nothing else, and you know, should wake up, I guess.
I should say that if Alex Cranberg, whom I can't see most of the time, wants to come in at any point, Alex, just let us know, and we'll make sure you do.
Sure, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, you've mentioned the elections in the United States, and that made me think about another election that people don't really pay much attention to, and that's the election of directors of energy companies. Last year, Exxon had several hostile directors be elected, not by the owners of Exxon shares, but by the agents that vote Exxon shares. There are 5 index fund managers that control the largest chunk of Exxon shares. They don't even own any of these shares themselves. The result being that the Exxon was put under pressure to step away from its LNG investments offshore Mozambique and offshore Vietnam. I'm more worried about those elections, honestly, and the separation of ownership and control of the energy companies that are under such ESG duress from governments. I think the elections that control oil companies, energy companies more broadly, and their ability to invest to solve these problems that we're talking about are perhaps going to be more critical even than the traditional political elections.
Thank you. And finally on this question, János Csák.
Yeah, I want to come back to your nuclear question. So you want to consider 2 issues. One is the construction of a nuclear power plant, which takes 10 to 20 years, with all the environmental clearance, technological clearance, geological clearance, all those things. So it's a long-term project, and the life of a nuclear power plant is 30, 70 years. But this is the only way to be actually fully independent. And the way you do it, and that's the second question, is the fuel. Because each technology, the Chinese, the French, the American, the Korean, they have, and the Russian, they have different forms of and refinement of the fuel. What happened in the case of PAX, that we agreed that the fuel in a couple of years' time could be replaced. So we won't be dependent even on Russian fuel. And we are considering to rejuvenile our own uranium production. And Hungary is big time in the nuclear value chain, so to say. So one of the biggest issues in the nuclear is the nuclear waste. And there is a lab, a European lab in Szeged. If you have time, visit Szeged, ELI, which has a lab that is working on halving and shortening the waste to get rid of the waste, which is very long time, and it's really hard to find place on the earth where you can do it. So we are on the edge from the construction through the waste management, and these are all European clean EU cleared projects. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Gábor Molnár. Just one question relating to the gas diversification of gas supplies. I haven't heard the panel mention a couple of things. One, now with the new status quo, is there any sense of rethinking the wisdom of doing Nabucco in the end? Why couldn't this be reconsidered and built upon? Number two, there are these Romanian gas fields owned by or concession owned by US gas companies. Why isn't there anything happening there to get gas out of the Black Sea? Number three, what was the wisdom of the EU signing very quickly this LNG gas supply agreement with the US instead of looking at Nabucco and the Romanian gas fields? To me, it would make more sense economically to try to get gas from Azerbaijan and Romania as opposed to converting it into LNG in the US and shipping it all the way across the Atlantic. Thank you.
So sort of accompanying that question, my understanding is that the amount of capacity of US LNG exports is substantially less than Europe's imports of natural gas from Russia. So there's a big gap there. Also, Germany has no LNG terminals. The one that has 6, I believe, which is Spain, and is only mid-capacity, can only ship it through France because there's only one pipeline. So all of these things are going to take time. So my question is, given that the producer price index in Germany was 31% reported last week, and probably not going to improve an awful lot, from a standpoint of the political scene, can they tolerate this high inflation and continued energy crisis, plus what could be easily a food crisis as the wheats and grains don't reach Germany?
Thank you. There are 4 minutes, and there are 4 of you gentlemen. So I'm going to ask you each to try to keep your response to 1 minute. And I begin with Alex at Cranberg.
Thanks. I think on this question of gas supply, that the answer is we need all of the above. There's one lesson from the past 6 months. It's that over-reliance on any one source is a mistake. LNG terminals open up Europe to the entire world. Obviously, a lot more infrastructure needs to be built in order to make it effective for all countries. No, I don't know what the viability of Nabucco is today. I do know that Romanian gas fields certainly have been developed. There were lots of people interested in developing those fields. Romanian internal politics prevented that. Excessive taxes being placed on the field, political and other motivation for that occurring is beyond my expertise, but presumably this recent developments in Russia will free that up and cause the Romanian government, as well as other governments, to be much more encouraging of the necessary oil and gas investment to reduce reliance on Russian gas.
Thank you very much. János Csák?
On the Romanian one, we don't know what is happening. We signed huge capacities and we are building the pipelines, so we are ready whenever our American and Romanian friends are ready to deliver, but the development is delayed. The Nabucco, it's an interesting question. It takes a long time and the capacity is there. Only the fact is that the Russian companies occupy the capacity. In terms of the prices, I just give you one data that in food production, I mean crops like wheat, sunflower, and corn, approximately 20% of the production cost is fertilizers. So if the fertilizers price increase 60%, that immediately increase the price of the crops. And also, if you look at the logistics, it has a big problem. It had a big problem. It have been having a big problem already with the equipment. But if the fuel price goes up, then clearly those prices of agricultural products won't be affordable for Africa.
No, look, I think it's no, to the gas, it's no secret that the situation, if Russia cuts, we have a serious situation. There are the group of countries, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Austria, and Germany too, despite it as a cedar, so it's still some maneuvering, but all are overly dependent on Russia. So if it is stopped, it's about, 150 billion cubic meters to Europe in a year. So yes, 1/3 somehow could be substituted with, the Poles finishing with the Norway pipeline. It should be at the end of the year. As I know, you are right that the construction of the new terminals will take some time for LNG, but you can use those ships like Lithuania is using, and those ships are available in the United States. But of course, you have to expect the price is skyrocketing higher of the gas if this is going to happen. Then the second third, you can restart all the facilities to produce electricity or heat from the coal. Yeah. Because, the households which are heating with the gas, they can go to the shopping center and to purchase some electric radiator. But, if the 50,000 households in one city will do this one night, then it's a pressure on the network. So it will not be easy. And one said simply savings, not to heat too much, and it would have a really serious impact on some industry which cannot operate without the gas and its ability to regulate this.
Thank you. Finally, Werner.
As to inflation, Germans have experienced 2 inflations in the 20th century. They really do not like inflation, to put it very mildly. And since they were promised that in the Eurozone, the European Central Bank would do everything conceivable to avoid inflation, the process of delegitimization of the European project will go on when it is not possible to stop the rise of inflation rates. As to rising prices for electricity, gas, fuel, and so on, this is felt by average Germans very much, and it's felt, of course, by German industry. And since increasing the prices on energy is one of the favorite projects of the Green Party, it has been of the Social Democrats, this will contribute to the delegitimization of this alternative leftist green approach to policy making in Germany. And those who will benefit from that are the right-wing populists. Last remark on Russia. In Germany, there is kind of a romantic relationship with Russia, anchored deeply in German history. Even the Second World War did not interrupt this romantic relationship between Germans and Russians, which is a good story, by the way. But we have a split in Germany. East Germans are much more pro-Russian than West Germans, and right-wing populists are much more popular in East Germany than in West Germany. And therefore, this whole complex, war of Russia in the Ukraine, rising energy prices, rising inflation rates, will make domestic politics in Germany ever more difficult and not tearing apart, but intensifying the tensions between East and West Germany and the two different party systems in both parts of the country. And since Germany, last time I say this, is of some importance in Europe, this will be detrimental for our cooperation in Europe if Germany loses her political stability.
Ladies and gentlemen, it only remains for me to say that, in my view, romantic relationships should be confined to marriage, and to thank the four speakers for splendid contributions and an extremely important debate. Thank you very much indeed.